My family thought it would be funny to leave me stranded in another state. Let's see if he can make it back. They laughed and drove away. I never came back. 14 years later, they found me. There were 94 missed calls that summer. I had just turned 21, and it was supposed to be like any other, working at my dad's auto parts store for abysmal pay and living at home because college wasn't practical, according to my father, Arthur. I was the eternal punching bag for my golden child brother, Martin. We weren't poor, exactly, but we sure as hell weren't the type who took vacations to Disneyland. So, when Arthur announced we were taking a family road trip to my uncle's wedding in Utah, I should have known something was up. 3 days into that nightmare road trip, I was already regretting not making up some excuse to stay home. My dad and Martin had been taking turns with their favorite game, making Leo's life hell. My mom, Clara, would occasionally say, "That's enough," in that weak voice of hers, but we all knew it was just for show. Look, I need to explain about my family. Arthur wasn't just your standard jerk of a dad. He was the type who'd wake you up at 3 a.m. to yell about a chore you forgot, who'd throw away your stuff if it was in his way, who'd been telling me I was worthless since I could understand words. Martin learned quickly. Either be dad's mini-me or become like me. Guess which path he chose. That morning we stopped at some nowhere rest area in Utah, in the middle of absolutely nothing for miles. Just scrub land, mountains in the distance, and a sad little bathroom building with vending machines. I'd been sleeping in the back of our maroon Ford Explorer and needed to stretch my legs and use the bathroom. Dad and Martin were laughing about something, while Mom was checking her makeup in the visor mirror. I remember exactly what I was wearing: a faded Led Zeppelin t-shirt, jeans with a hole in one knee, and these beat-up boots I'd had forever. I didn't take my phone, because it was charging in the car. I didn't take my wallet, because why would I? We were in the middle of nowhere, and I was just taking a leak. 10 minutes, that's how long I was in that bathroom, maybe less. When I walked out, squinting in the Utah sunshine, the parking spot was empty. Our maroon Ford Explorer was gone. At first, I thought they'd moved it, playing some stupid prank. I walked around the entire rest area. Nothing. That's the thing about betrayal from your own blood. It hits differently than any other kind. I waited an hour, sitting on the curb, telling myself they were just trying to scare me and would be back. People came and went, a few giving me weird looks. A trucker asked if I was okay. I lied and said I was waiting for my girlfriend who was in the bathroom. He nodded and left. After hour 2, I started to get that cold feeling in my gut. They weren't coming back. My first instinct was to borrow someone's phone, call them, and beg them to come get me. But as I was about to approach a mom with 2 kids, something stopped me. A lifetime of memories flashed through my head. Every humiliation, every time they'd laughed at my expense, every joke that was really just cruelty with a punchline. I could almost hear them. Martin's voice. "Dude, I bet he's crying right now." My dad? "He'll figure it out if he's not as stupid as he looks." My mom's weak protests. That didn't actually change anything. So I made a decision. I approached that mom and asked to use her phone, but I didn't call my family. I called information and got the number for the nearest shelter in Ogden, about 50 miles away. Then I asked her if she could possibly give me a ride into town. I told her my family had an emergency and had to leave but were sending someone for me later. She hesitated, but I must have looked harmless enough because she agreed. That first night at the shelter was a reality check. I had nothing but the clothes on my back, no ID, no money, and no contacts. The shelter guy, Frank, let me use their computer to look up my uncle's address from the wedding invitation I'd seen. I thought maybe I could get to the wedding and find my family there. But then I sat staring at the screen and thought, why? Why chase after people who literally abandoned me on the side of the road for laughs? Instead, I created a new email account. I looked up resources for people who needed emergency ID replacement. I Googled jobs that paid cash. I made a plan. 2 days later, I was washing dishes at a little diner called the Copper Spoon. The owner, Marge, was a 60-something woman with fiery red hair and more turquoise jewelry than you'd expect. I'd wandered in and asked if they needed help, telling her my wallet was stolen but I needed work. She sized me up and said, Dishwasher quit yesterday. You steal from me, you'll regret it. Start now. That's the thing about rock bottom. You can only go up from there. For a week, I worked doubles, slept at the shelter, and wore donated clothes. Frank helped me start the process of getting a replacement ID by contacting Vital Records in my home state. I set up a cheap pay-as-you-go phone from a corner store with the first cash I earned. 7 days after they abandoned me, my phone rang. It was an unknown number. I answered. It was my mother, her voice shaking. Where was I? Was I okay? They had been looking everywhere. It was just supposed to be a joke. They waited down the road for 20 minutes, came back, and couldn't find me. I listened to her panic, her fake concern. In the background, I could hear my dad telling her to tell me to stop being dramatic and get my ass to Uncle Steve's. I heard Martin laughing. Leo? Are you there? Say something. We've been worried sick. That cold feeling in my gut was gone. Now, there was just clarity. You wanted to see if I could make it on my own, I said, my voice steadier than it had ever been when talking to them. So, watch me. I hung up and blocked the number. Then I blocked every family number I could remember. For good measure, I went to a different carrier the next day and changed my number completely. There were 27 missed calls before I changed that number. I imagined them getting more and more pissed when they realized their punching bag wasn't coming back to be punched. A month later, I had my own studio apartment above a bookstore. It was tiny and smelled like old paper all the time, but it was mine. I worked my way up to prep cook at the Copper Spoon, and Marge was teaching me how to properly chop vegetables without losing a finger. Sometimes, I'd check my old email, the one my family knew. Messages piled up. From Mom, please come home, we're sorry. From Dad, this childish stunt needs to end now. From Martin, dude, it was just a joke, stop being such a baby. I never responded. Not once. That's the thing about freedom. Once you've tasted it, there's no going back to the cage. Look, I won't pretend it was easy. Some nights, I'd scroll through Instagram and see pictures of people with normal families who actually loved each other, and I'd feel an ache that no amount of screw them could fill. I had nights where the loneliness felt like it would swallow me whole. Holidays were the worst. But every morning, I'd wake up in my shitty little apartment that smelled like books, go to my cooking job where nobody called me worthless, and build my life, one brick at a time. 3 months after they left me at that rest stop, I checked my email one last time. There was a new message from my mom. Your grandmother is asking about you. Please just let us know you're alive. I closed the email, deleted the account, and threw my old SIM card in the dumpster behind the diner. That night, Marge taught me how to make her famous peach cobbler. She said I had a good feel for the dough. It was the first genuine compliment I could remember getting in years. I never looked back. Update 1. 6 years later. 6 years after being abandoned at that Utah rest stop, I found myself staring at a familiar face on my Facebook feed. It wasn't because I was stalking my family's profiles. Okay, maybe I was. But because Martin had just been tagged in a local news article back home. He'd gotten a DUI and crashed his car into a storefront. Nobody was hurt, but the damage was extensive. The newspaper had used his high school quarterback photo. He looked so young, so smug, nothing like the bloated mugshot underneath. That's the thing about karma. It moves at its own pace, but it never forgets an address. By then, I'd built something resembling a life in Ogden. My crappy studio above the bookstore had eventually been traded for a 1-bedroom with a balcony. I'd worked my way up from dishwasher to line cook to assistant manager at the Copper Spoon. Marge still ran the place with an iron fist and a flour-dusted glove, but she'd started treating me less like a charity case and more like a weird nephew or something. My first big purchase when I had actual savings was a decent laptop. Nothing fancy, just enough to take online classes through the community college. Business management, basic accounting, the stuff Arthur always said was for people who can't do real work. I'd spend my mornings at the diner, afternoons studying, and evenings back at work. Rinse and repeat. Look, I won't pretend I wasn't still messed up from what happened. Trust issues? More like trust subscriptions that I could cancel anytime someone got too close. I'd made exactly 2 friends in 6 years. My neighbor Finn, who played drums in a terrible punk band, and sometimes brought me homemade chili that was mostly just beans, and Marge, if she counted as a friend and not a boss. That changed when Maya started coming into the Copper Spoon every Wednesday and Friday, like clockwork. She always ordered the same thing, a veggie scramble, no onions, and black coffee. She always sat at the counter with a textbook. Law school, I later found out. She had this way of completely zoning out while studying, her fork halfway to her mouth for minutes at a time. I started timing her once. The record was 8 minutes before she realized she was holding cold eggs. It took 4 months of me bringing her coffee refills before she actually looked up and saw me. Really saw me. Her eyes did this thing where they widened just a little, and she said my name tag was spelled wrong. It wasn't, but it became our weird little joke. I'd wear a different wrong name every Wednesday and Friday. Leo. 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 She'd point it out, and I'd act surprised. It was the stupidest flirting in human history, but it worked. Our first date wasn't even supposed to be a date. Her study group bailed last minute. She had a reservation at this Italian place that was impossible to get into, and I happened to be wiping down the counter when she got the cancellation text. Next thing I knew, I was sitting across from her, both of us awkwardly realizing this looked exactly like a date. 6 months later, she moved into my apartment. A year after that, we got a slightly bigger place together. Nothing fancy, just a 2-bedroom with a bathroom where the toilet didn't run constantly, and neighbors who didn't practice drum solos at 2 a.m. Meanwhile, I kept tabs on my family through fake accounts. I'm not proud of it, but there it is. Dad's auto parts store started struggling after a big chain opened on the edge of town. I saw him ranting about it on community Facebook pages, his posts getting increasingly desperate and bitter. Mom's social media became this weird shrine to family, with constant throwback pictures of us all smiling, and posts about missing her boys, plural, which was rich. She'd tag Martin, but never mention me, like I'd been erased. Martin bounced from job to job, with lots of vague posts about haters and new opportunities. The classic social media smokescreen of someone whose life is circling the drain. 3 years in, Marge took me aside during inventory and told me she was thinking about opening a second location of the Copper Spoon on the other side of town. She asked if I'd be interested in running it. Not owning it, running it. An important distinction. I didn't sleep that night, kept thinking it was some kind of test or joke. People like me didn't get opportunities like that. Arthur had made sure I understood that much. That's the thing about poisonous beliefs. They stay in your system long after you've escaped a snake. But I said yes. Because Maya, half asleep beside me, mumbled that I'd be stupid not to. Because Finn, through a haze of cheap beer when I mentioned it, said, "Duh, you practically run the original place already." Because Marge wasn't Arthur, wasn't my family, and had never once made me feel like I was worthless. The Copper Spoon East opened 6 months later. It was smaller than the original with a different menu, my menu. I worked 90-hour weeks that first year, lost 10 pounds I couldn't afford to lose, and fought with Maya about never being home. I came home to passive-aggressive post-it notes on the fridge more than once. But it worked. People came. People came back. The food was good, the vibe was good. We weren't getting rich, but we were making it. 4 years after being abandoned, I made enough to help Maya with her law school loans. Not all of them. Those things are monstrous, but enough to make a dent. She cried when I showed her the payment confirmation. Not movie crying with perfect mascara, but real crying. Snotty, red-faced, hiccuping, crying. I'd never felt more like a real person than in that moment. Then my grandmother died. I found out through Facebook. Mom posted this long, dramatic tribute with a million heart emojis. Grandma Eleanor had been the only one in the family who ever stood up to Arthur, the only one who seemed to see me. She used to slip me $10 bills when no one was looking and tell me to save it for my escape. I think she meant college. Turns out it was more literal than that. I thought about going to the funeral, even looked up flights. Maya said she'd come with me, hold my hand through the whole awful reunion. Finn offered his crappy hatchback if I wanted to drive instead. Marge just shrugged and said, "Dead people don't know if you're there or not, so do what brings you peace." I didn't go. Instead, I sent flowers, a generic sympathy arrangement. I signed the card, Leo. No return address, no note, just my name. The explosion on social media was immediate. Mom posted about signs and, quote, reaching out from beyond. Martin made cryptic comments about prodigal sons. Arthur said nothing publicly, but I could imagine the storm behind closed doors. A week later, I got a friend request from a profile I didn't recognize. Some random name, no posts, no friends. I almost deleted it until I saw the message. It's Uncle Steve. Your mom gave me your old email, but it bounced back. Are you okay? We've been worried. Your dad has been asking around about you. I blocked the account. That night, I had my first panic attack in 2 years, sitting on our bathroom floor at 3 a.m., trying not to wake Maya, feeling like my lungs were collapsing. I imagined Arthur hunting me down, showing up at the diner, destroying everything I'd built. Maya found me there an hour later. She didn't ask questions, just sat with me, her shoulder touching mine. When I could finally breathe again, she said the simplest thing. They can't take anything from you that you don't give them. The next morning, I called a lawyer and got advice on restraining orders, just in case. I tightened privacy settings on everything and asked Marge to alert the staff not to give out information about me to anyone. Practical steps. Control what you can control. 6 years to the day after being abandoned, I married Maya. It was a small ceremony at a state park. Finn was my best man. Marge made the cake and cried through the whole thing, mascara running down her wrinkled cheeks. Maya's large, loud family adopted me instantly. Her dad made dad jokes that somehow didn't make me flinch. Her mom hugged me without setting off alarm bells in my head. That's the thing about family. Sometimes it finds you when you've stopped looking. A week after the wedding, scrolling through my dummy account late at night, I saw it. A post from Arthur on a community page, looking for information on my son Leo. Last known location, Ogden, Utah. Family emergency. There was no emergency. I knew that much. What I didn't know was why, after 6 years of nothing, they were suddenly looking for me. So I dug deeper. I created another fake account, joined the community groups from my hometown, and pieced it together bit by bit. The auto parts store had closed. Their house was in foreclosure. Mom had some medical issues she was vague booking about. Martin had moved back home after his 3rd DUI. They weren't looking for me because they missed me. They were looking for me because they needed something. And you know what? For the first time in 6 years, I smiled when I thought about them. Not because I was happy about their misfortune, but because I realized something important. I didn't care anymore. I closed the laptop, crawled into bed next to my sleeping wife, and made a decision. I would keep watching from a distance, not out of hate, not out of love, but because sometimes the best revenge isn't what you do. It's what you build while they're busy destroying themselves. Final update. 14 years later. It started with a LinkedIn notification. 14 years after being abandoned at that Utah rest stop, my carefully constructed life had a glitch. Someone had viewed my profile 32 times in one day. That's not unusual for LinkedIn. Recruiters do weird stuff like that all the time. What was unusual was the name. Martin Price, my brother. That's the thing about the past. It's patient. It'll wait in the tall grass for years before it strikes. By then, my life looked nothing like that first year in Ogden. Maya had finished law school, passed the bar, and now worked at a local firm 4 days a week so she could be home with our kids more. We had 2, Sophie, 7, and Ben, 4. The apartment above the bookstore had given way to a modest 4-bedroom on the outskirts of town. Nothing fancy, but it had a yard where the kids could play, and I could grow tomatoes that never quite turned out right. The Copper Spoon had expanded to 4 locations. It was still not some massive franchise or anything, but enough that I didn't have to work the line anymore, except when someone called in sick. Marge had semi-retired 2 years earlier, though she still showed up unannounced to criticize the way we made her peach cobbler recipe. I'd made peace with my past, or so I thought. I still kept tabs on the family from a distance, But the constant checking had faded to maybe once every few months. Last I knew, Arthur and Clara had moved to a smaller place after losing the house. Martin had gotten married, divorced, then married again. They had all seemingly moved on with their lives, as I had with mine. The LinkedIn thing rattled me though. 14 years of silence, and now this. I mentioned it to Maya as we were doing our regular Sunday night thing, folding laundry while half watching whatever crime show we were currently behind on. She paused, a mismatched sock in each hand, and asked if I was okay. I nodded, because what else could I say? That I was suddenly 21 years old again, stranded at a rest stop? That I could feel Arthur's voice in my head, calling me worthless? 3 days later, I was at the Copper Spoon East, the original second location, helping with inventory, because our supplier had sent the wrong kind of coffee filters again. My manager at the front called back that there was some family asking for me. My first thought was Maya's parents, who sometimes surprised us when they were passing through. I headed out front, my mental gears already shifting to how to convince them to stay for dinner. It wasn't Maya's family. Arthur looked older, grayer, his formerly imposing frame somehow shrunken. Clara's face had that pinched look that comes from years of worry, her hair dyed an unnatural shade of brown. And Martin looked like Arthur had at 40, with the same stance, the same way of taking up space. There was a woman with them I didn't recognize, young, maybe in her early 20s, hanging back like she wasn't sure she belonged in this moment. Nobody spoke. The lunch rush noise seemed to fade away until all I could hear was my own heartbeat thudding in my ears. Arthur broke the silence first, saying my name like a question. I nodded because my voice had apparently gone on vacation. Look, I'd imagined this moment 1,000 different ways over 14 years. In some versions, I told them off spectacularly. In others, I was cool and distant, unbothered by their existence. In a few embarrassing late-night scenarios, we even had a tearful reconciliation. Reality is always messier than imagination. I gestured to an empty table in the corner and told my manager to bring waters. I sat down across from the people who had once been my family and waited. They'd found me through a magazine article, Utah Business Monthly, 10 local success stories. It wasn't even a big feature, just a sidebar with a photo of me in front of the Copper Spoon's original location. But apparently one of Mom's friends from high school had moved to Utah, seen it, and sent it to her with an "Isn't this your son?" message. 94 missed calls. That's how many they'd made to my old number over the years before it was disconnected. Mom had kept count. She mentioned this like it was supposed to mean something. They talked over each other. Mom about how worried they'd been, Arthur about how I'd misunderstood what happened that day, and Martin awkwardly trying to act like we were old buddies catching up. The young woman, Martin's second wife Chloe, it turned out, just watched me with curious eyes. I let them talk, watched them spin their version of reality, where they weren't the villains. I noticed how Arthur kept eyeing the restaurant, mentally calculating what it might be worth. I saw how Mom's hand trembled slightly when she reached for her water. I caught Martin's practice charm slipping whenever he thought I wasn't looking directly at him. Finally, when they ran out of steam, I asked the only question that mattered. Why now? That's when the real story came out in bits and pieces between awkward silences. Arthur had medical bills, heart problems, and no insurance. The second house was being foreclosed on, too. Martin's business venture, something vague involving online sales, had failed spectacularly. Mom needed knee surgery she couldn't afford. They weren't there for reconciliation. They were there for money. I should have been angry. I should have thrown them out. Instead, I felt something unexpected. Pity. They looked so small, so desperate. These giants, who had once controlled my whole world, were just flawed, broken people. I invited them to dinner at my house that night, saying I needed to talk to Maya. They agreed eagerly, Arthur already halfway to considering it a done deal. That afternoon was surreal. I picked Sophie up from her gymnastics class and helped Ben with his preschool show-and-tell preparation, all while texting Maya updates about who was coming to dinner. She offered to take the kids to her sister's. I said no, I wanted them there. I wanted my family to meet my family. Dinner was lasagna. My specialty that wasn't really special. Just a recipe from the back of a box that I'd tweaked over the years. Sophie set the table without being asked, carefully placing forks on the wrong side until Maya quietly corrected her. Ben insisted on wearing his dinosaur costume because it was Tuesday, and apparently Tuesday was now Dinosaur Day. When the doorbell rang, I almost dropped the dish I was carrying to the table. Maya squeezed my arm as she passed, whispering that she had my back no matter what. The kids looked up curiously, sensing something important was happening. That's the thing about moments you've dreaded. When they finally arrive, they're simultaneously worse and better than you imagined. Introductions were awkward. Arthur kept calling Maya Mia, despite corrections. Clara couldn't stop crying whenever she looked at the kids, which was freaking Ben out. Martin and Chloe were the least awful, making actual efforts at normal conversation, though Martin kept dropping hints about family helping family. After dinner, Maya took the kids upstairs for baths and bedtime, giving me a look that clearly said, "Text if you need extraction." Then it was just me and them, sitting in a living room that suddenly felt too small. Arthur started in on the pitch, how family sticks together, how he'd always known I'd make something of myself, a lie, how they just needed a little help to get back on their feet. $30,000. Just a loan, of course. I let him finish. Then I asked him if he remembered what he said to me on my 18th birthday. He looked blank. I reminded him. At least you can't disappoint me anymore, once you're not legally my problem. I asked Mom if she remembered what she did when Arthur threw my acceptance letter to community college in the trash. Nothing. She'd done nothing. I asked Mom if he remembered telling my first girlfriend I was probably gay anyway, when she came to the house looking for me. They squirmed, made excuses. Arthur started to get that dangerous edge to his voice that used to make me shrink. But here's the thing. I wasn't shrinking anymore. I was 14 years and a million miles from that person. I went to my office and came back with an envelope. I handed it to Arthur. Inside was a check for $81.25. Arthur looked at it, confused, and asked what the hell this was supposed to be. I told him that in 2011, that was exactly what a Greyhound ticket from Ogden to our hometown would have cost. The exact amount it would have taken for me to make it back home from where they abandoned me. The silence was absolute. Then Arthur started shouting, calling me ungrateful, selfish, and said I'd always been a disappointment. The greatest hits album of my childhood playing one last time. I didn't argue, didn't shout back. I just stood up and told them it was time to leave. Mom tried a different approach. Tears, guilt. How could you do this to family? Martin went cold, the mask of the friendly brother completely dropped. Chloe just looked embarrassed for all of them. When they finally left, Arthur crumpling the check and throwing it on our front step, I closed the door and leaned against it, my legs suddenly shaky. Maya came downstairs and asked if I was okay. I nodded, not trusting my voice. We cleaned up the dinner dishes in silence, checked on the sleeping kids, and got ready for bed like it was any other night. As I was setting the security system, I pulled up the front door camera on my phone. They were still in the driveway, arguing. Arthur was gesturing wildly, Mom was crying, and Martin was looking at our house with an expression I recognized too well. Envy mixed with hatred. Finally, they got in their rental car and drove away. I've never seen or heard from them again. I don't expect to. The chapter is closed. That's the thing about revenge. The best kind isn't something you do, it's something you live. Every happy moment with my kids, every inside joke with Maya, every quiet Sunday morning with nothing to fear, every single ordinary day in a life built on my terms. I never made it back home. I did something better. I built one.